cost of capital lines and how you might visually see the difference between small, medium, and large. The large cost of capital or capital market line would be solid and almost flat. Because we have, I'm just showing this from a 10,000 foot view level, but debt all the way out to equity expected returns. What's the long term? I'm almost hesitant to ask this question. For large public investments in large public companies, what's our long term 10-year sort of expected return on capital now? 7 or 8% maybe? It's dropping like around. Well, let's say it's 7 or 8%, because that's about what this graph shows. And then right now they pretty much give the debt away, right? Because the Fed's instituted these sort of artificially low interest rates. And so what we have is a the reason that the large line is solid is it's a supermarket of securities that's fairly efficiently enacted. So it is a fairly, we can argue about how efficient, I don't care. But I will tell you that when Goldman Sachs goes down the commercial paper aisle, from one end of that aisle to the next is a small difference. It's not, maybe 20 basis points or something. It's fairly efficiently allocated and priced. Whereas the middle market line, which you'll see we now call, and I call in the book, the Pepperdine Private Capital Market line. And Pepperdine didn't ask for that, by the way. I just said, this is one of the many gifts I bestowed on Pepperdine. The Pepperdine Private Capital Market line looks very much like this. It's not quite a hockey stick, although it's tending to that. These are the expected returns of the various players. You'll notice that the debt side of it is fairly effective. For instance, what is today? Today's Monday. On Friday of this week, my firm, we were hired a while back, my investment banking firm, to raise $100 million for a middle market company out of New Jersey. And so we went out and did our thing, and you'll see more about what our thought structure was here. But we raised $75 million of it in senior, and then $25 million of it in a second lien loan. This was a private middle market company doing around $400 million in sales. The senior went off, so you can see, the senior went off at LIBOR plus 2 all in, LIBOR meaning nothing. And then the junior, the second lien loan, went off at LIBOR plus 7%, which is darn near nothing. No warrants, no sweeteners, no nothing. So the whole cost of that financing, the cost of debt, because there was no equity, which was debt, was weighted average, what would that be, 3.5? Whoa! Well, there we are. And so what happened is that company is almost accessing the public cost of capital line. Almost. We're somewhere between the middle market line and that. So it shows you that how this is enacted in real life can be fairly interesting. And yet, if we would have gone out and not raised the second lien loan, which was priced right in here, if we would have gone out and tried to raise that part, $25 million as mezzanine, that would have been priced in the 15 to 20% range. So, okay, more on that later. So there's big breaks and it doesn't show how big they are, but we may have 700 basis point differences in the middle market between one alternative and the next. Now that's a flea market. That's not a supermarket. That's a flea market. And so we have a somewhat effective middle market capital availability, but not an efficient one yet. It's basically only efficient down in here. It's effective throughout the whole, because if you have a compelling story, you can get the money, kind of, but it's going to be a high cost of capital, is what I'm saying. Now the small markets are free for all, because this is typically under 5 million in sales market. You've got the Small Business Administration and business banking down here, which I have to admit is effective for what it is. I mean, we're not expected to be all things to all people, but what it is, it's fairly effective. And then there's really very little institutionalized mezzanine, which is subordinated debt lending. I should have defined that before. And almost no institutionalized equity. I'm now the institutionalized equity in my family. So nieces and nephews come to Uncle Rob to get the financing. Well, Uncle Herb has always been the financing source up here. And so there are some PEGs now, private equity groups, and some mezzanines that have fallen from grace and they've fallen into the small company market. Why have they done that? What are they after? Deal flow. There's just way too many competitors in the middle market, and so there is now some budding institutionalization of mezzanine and PEGs in the small business market. They will get killed. because the small business market is the ultimate Wild West. You just shoot people over a contract difference. You don't go to the legal stage. You know, it is almost truly a Wild West. And so they will get killed up here, but you got to put the money out. See, the problem is when you're a mezzanine or VC or PEG and you take the money, what do you have to do with that money? You have to invest it. It's the biggest problem they have. Because if you were to take, let's just say $100 million, what's the likelihood that in the next 12 to 18 months, great deals are going to come dancing through your doors? Hey, it's zero. And so what happens is they put all kinds of deals on. But anyway, so what we have is a large, or a fairly substantial difference in cost of capital lines here. Now, am I saying that every company is viewed exactly on this line? Well, no, this is sort of a medium. These are medium lines. All right, so finally we're at this. We're about to leave the world of theory and get into the world of practice. I hold your applause. And what I realized after I had written PCMs 1 is I have one of these international publishers, John Wiley & Sons, and I submitted this, whatever it was, 40-chapter book to them. This is going back in 2003. I submitted it, and it took them 3 months, and I knew they weren't reading any of it. It took them 3 months to realize that there was no chapter 1. I knew they weren't reading any of it. I could just tell. Nobody at Wiley knows anything about any of this stuff. And so they finally, the editor sheepishly called me and said, Rob, couldn't help but notice, I said, well, you should have noticed months ago. Couldn't help but notice if there's no chapter 1. What was the problem I had? The problem I had was I'd written a book on valuation, a book on capital formation, and a book on transfer, but I had no idea how to merge it from a structural explanation standpoint. Now, I knew from a practical standpoint they were all interreliant, interdependent, because I'd been doing this business at that point for 10 years or something. So I knew that you didn't know anything about valuation until you knew how capital transfer affected it, vice versa and vice versa. I just didn't know how to organize a body of knowledge. And let's have a show of hands here. Who knows how to organize a body of knowledge? We don't learn that kind of stuff. I dropped off the writing thing and I went to the reading thing that summer. And what did I read? Who does know how to organize bodies of knowledge? There are people that know. They're dead. Who are the dead people that know how to organize bodies of knowledge? The great philosophers. It turns out this is what they did. Nobody ever said that. But I mean, basically, whether it's Aristotle, the body politic, or Hegel, and what I found, I read a couple dozen books by the great philosophers, because I knew that they had been organizing bodies of knowledge. They were just early in the game, right? Because this goes back a couple thousand years. By the way, we haven't caught up yet with the ancient Greeks. We're still light years behind them, but okay, I'll leave that alone. I'm not talking about the current Greeks. I'm talking about the ancient Greeks. But anyway, Hegel, a German philosopher, who would have guessed I'd find absolute truth in a German philosopher, but I did. Hegel came out with a construct 100 years ago, 200 years ago, called the three-legged stool. He said that so many things in life can only be understood and explained by a three-legged stool. What is this? Of course, he was like book 22. I could have started out reading Hegel. I would have saved myself all that. But Hegel, I took it in order, and so Hegel was one of the more recent ones. Well, Hegel's three-legged stool was perfect because he said there's so many things. It's called triadic logic. So many things can only be understood. I had a three-legged stool that was interrelated. It was equally dependent on valuation, capital, and transfer. And one of the legs was either not considered, or shorter or longer, less or more important than the others. You'd fall over. The argument would fall over. I said, oh, thank you, Hegel. Because I was starting to get a little worried here, because I just, you got to have chapter 1 in a book, right? And so then it dawned on me that nautical engineers and sailors had come up with this concept of triangulation, that you fix your current position relative to two others. That's what you triangulate. You ever hear this? You triangulate your position. That's what that means. You fix your curves out. Hegel didn't really talk too much about that, but somehow I had a brother-in-law who was a civil engineer, and he'd let me know. And so by surrounding myself by relatively smart, dead, and alive people, I was able to come up with this concept of triangulation, and it's really true. And all it says, each chapter I triangulate your position. What I say is, look, you don't know a thing about valuation until you understand how capital transfer influence it. You don't know anything about capital until you understand how transfer and valuation influence it, and then vice versa. And so what I do is, each step of the way, I triangulate your position so you don't get lost in the conceptual woods. Now, here's an example of a whole industry. Let me give you an example of a whole industry that has not triangulated its position. The business appraisers, of which we have 15,000. I'm going to beat this horse here in the next section, but a preview of coming beating of the horses. 15,000 certified appraisers, which I think I was number 150 out of the 15,000, so I go back over 20 years. We only look at valuation. We don't look at the capital transfer side of the triangles. And so what that means is we're allowed by the authorities, people like the IRS and the tax courts, to go anywhere we want for return expectations. So the authorities say, go grab public return data, manipulate it any way you see fit to derive private values. Well, see, now that's an example of ignoring capital and transfer sides of the triangle. And so that's just wrong. This is a case. There are cases now where there's right and wrong, and that's a wrong thing. So I spent a lot of my time with appraisers, showing them what's right. And one of the Pepperdine professors, and I don't know if the article's in the book, but we've created a new discount rate model called the private cost capital model, which uses the Pepperdine private capital market survey data, the empirical data, to drive a new model that's private to private, because then we respect what the capital providers are telling us in valuation. As opposed to going and say, well, IBM says, IBM trades at 20 times PE, well, let's do this, let's put a little twister and manipulate that down to some sort of discount rate. What? What? Are we raising money in this $4 million sales company the same way IBM does? No. And so, but this is a case that prior to 3 years ago, we didn't have the empirical data to generate a private return expectation, a discount rate. Well, then I started with Pepperdine surveying the private markets every 6 months, 3.5 years ago. Now we got the data, so now it's time to train the authorities all about this. I spent a lot of time with judges, the SEC, the IRS, and boy, do I enjoy all that, and boy, does it pay the bills. You do what you got to do, right? Don't pick a fight if you're doing it for money, because it just, these things take forever. Well, anyway, so that's the underlying basis for middle market finance. I am now going to take you into each of the three legs of the stool. So you can see, you got to understand each of the three legs, valuation, capital, and transfer, individually. Then we'll talk about how they all, throughout, we'll talk about how they're all interrelated and independent. All right, here we go. So what is this middle market finance? It's a study of how managers of private middle market companies make investment financing decisions. Now, I would say corporate finance is a study of how managers of large public companies make investment financing decisions. So all we have is a segmentation difference. The three legs are, and don't get concerned, because you're going to leave this slide not understanding these three legs, but that's fine. I'll get you there. Don't get nervous. I can tell you're starting to get nervous. Don't get nervous. Value relativity. Values relative to the reason you need to know the value of a private company. Value, and I don't mean a written value. I mean, value is relative to the reason you need to know that value, and there are dozens of reasons you need to know what a private company is worth. That's how, therefore, we have dozens of correct values. But no, I'm skipping ahead, all right? So that's the first, value relativity. The second is this bizarre, the flea market. I call it bizarre just because it's alliterative and I love alliteration. But basically, what we're talking about is private capital is allocated vis-a-vis the rules of the flea market. And the third is the transfer spectrum. We're not talking about selling your business. There are 500 ways to transfer part or all of a private business. Every once in a while I give a talk of, let's see, how do I say that? The talk titles are real important. How do I say this? I say, 500 ways to transfer your business you hadn't considered. It's like, you mean there's more than one? Well, yes, there's a whole spectrum of ways to transfer your business. And so those are the three legs of the stool that we have to get our minds around. Now, for you to be in the top 1% of the world's, in terms of private capital market knowledge, you have to own the structure of these three legs. Don't worry about the details. So what I'm telling you in the book, and more importantly in person, is just read the introductions and conclusions of the textbook. That's enough. That's like 8 chapters. How can I have 4 introductions and 4 conclusions? Well, I guess I have an introduction to the book, an introduction to value, capital, transfer, and then I have conclusions for each of those. So only read those. If you read anything else, you look up everything else. So if you want to know ESOPs, or if you want to know fair market value, if you want to know, how to run a private auction, look that up. If you try to read this book cover to cover, it will kill you. It will kill you. I'm serious. I mean, this is a case where do not read the book. Is this the first time in history an author said, do not read the book? I'm looking in the camera, do not read the book. Read the intros and conclusions, because see, what will happen is you'll own the structure, and then you'll know, I need to go read about mezzanine capital. That chapter. you'll know enough by owning the structure to know where you need to go. And then that's fine. I've structured the inside of the book to always make it easy for you then to wade into the subject matter chapters is probably the best way to say it. But the book has no beginning or end. If you read the whole book, you'll look like me, whipped. So you can only imagine how it is to write such a book. All right. You're lost if you just focus on one part of the triangle. So always consider how in the private, especially the middle market, how all three sides of the triangle influence you. So I am in my family known as investment banker man, and this would be me, back when I used to wear ties. This would be me. Here's you wouldn't know it, but here's your typical business appraiser. This is what they all look like. Here's what the business appraiser is telling me. The harmonic mean of the public control premiums derives an implied minority discount that is multiplicatively, not additively, applied to the unadjusted. Why it's so difficult to value a business appraiser's opinion. What in the world are they talking about? I mean, I am one of them, and I don't understand. I keynote all the conferences. I keynoted the NACLA. Anybody at the NACLA conference this year? I got up and told 500 people, you know, basically the problem we have in business appraisers, you're all a bunch of idiots. Oh. And then I went, and then 90 minutes later, they're all sitting there, yeah, God, he's right. We talked about a bunch of idiots. And so, but in any event, that's what they get from me. Most of the appraisal conferences now, I bring John Paglia, my partner here at Pepperdine, because he's a lot easier on the audience. I'm not. I'm 10 years into this. I can't take it anymore. So in any event, but the appraisers have a different language. It's a notional language. See, they're not worried about reality. They're not constrained by reality. They don't care about reality. Now, see, me, as I write out checks to buy business, or as I'm advising people to do anything, raise capital, buy business, reality sort of matters. You know, reality should be what dominates. I don't care about the notional. Now, the only time I care about the notional is like the first part of this, where we're talking about intellectual constructs. I care about the notional. But when it comes to check writing time, I'm reality. Because the notional doesn't care about me. I'm reality. Well, the appraisers haven't had that, haven't been forced into reality. Well, John and I are forcing them into reality. They'll let you in on the strategy. All right, so here's professional value today. Now this is, I'm not picking on any one person because this is what we're allowed to do. I'm still certified business appraiser. We're allowed to do these things. We're historic and forensic meaning legal. So most of 99% of the written appraisal activity is compliance oriented. Somebody needs to do it for estate plan, has to have evaluation, for estate planning reasons, for tax reasons, for litigation reasons. It's mainly being done because you're forced to have an appraisal. It's not being done because you're trying to figure out, do I create value in my company by hiring that senior vice president, or do I create value in my company by leasing that machine, or do I create value by buying that company? There's none of that, or very little of that. It's mainly compliance. It's almost all notional, meaning that it's not even, there's no attempt to make it real, nor do you have to. So the authorities, I keep going back to the authorities, the people that tell us how to do stuff, like the IRS and the judges and the courts, they say it's okay right now to be notional. Now, that's one of the main things I'm trying to get changed. And we measure things in professional valuation with singular certainty. You know, a share of ABC Seacoast stock is worth 99.54, and our only regret is that we can't go 40 places right at the decimal, because that's how certain we are of that value. See, the problem with professional value is it's not the least bit useful to make good investment or financing decisions. And it's because it isn't attempting to. See, we have a disconnect. This is a massive disconnect. Now, normally, I'm okay with disconnects as long as it doesn't interfere. You know, people can go out and dream up whatever they want, I don't care. But this is a case where this disconnect's killing America. Because we have 15,000 people who are valuation experts who have nothing to say about valuation in a real context. And so therefore I care. Other than that, I could care less. If the academics want to go talk about corporate finance and pills come home as it relates to $1 million sales company, I don't really care. But I do care when people are presenting information as if it does apply here and people are writing checks as a result of it. I care. So in this case, I am going to stop this. I'm about halfway through stopping it. So let's get into value relativity. And once again, don't be concerned, because in the next 3 slides, you will own value relativity. So I'm using in the book and today motive and goal interchangeably. So once again, those are, your motive leads to why you need an appraisal. I'm not talking about necessarily written appraisal. I'm talking about motor goalie is the reason why you need to know the value of something. Most of the time that isn't going to be written, by the way. Well, that reason selects a value world. Uh-oh, we have a new term here, value world. A value world is just a construct that I had to create. We call it standards of value in appraisal land. Just a construct I had to create. So when you have a reason that you need to know the value of something, you know you're in a separate world. Each reason leads to a separate world. And you're going to get on the next slide all these, not all of them, but a dozen or so of the different worlds. It's like the cosmos. Imagine we all got on a rocket ship and we go blasting out. Every time we land on a body, wouldn't it have a different mass, a different gravity, different atmosphere, everything? Wouldn't it have everything be different? That's the way value worlds are. Whenever you're in a value world and the reason leads you there, everything's different. So you got to know that. Everything's different. So private business valuation is just an attempt to make sense of this value relativity. So we have 36 roughly different reasons you need to know the value of a private firm. Each value world generates a unique value. Different value. All correct. All at the same time. So every private business has at least 36 correct values at the same time. Now, how far have we just gotten from every business has one true value? You see? And so, why is there value? Oh, here's it. Why is there value relativity? Because Rob says so, and that should be enough for you at this point. But that isn't the answer. Why is there value relativity? This is sort of like a 401 question. Who creates value relativity? I'm just diagramming. I didn't create it.
The authorities.
The authorities, thank you. The sun shines. Yeah, the authorities. There's an authority in each value world that says if you enter my world, young man or woman, here's how you're going to value. So when we enter the IRS's world, called fair market value, they tell us how we're going to value in their world. Now, if we don't heed their advice and we ignore them, they can sanction us. Well, in their case, they could probably put us in jail, but each authority has said how to value in the world. We as appraisers, and this plays real big with the ASA and appraisal, we as appraisers are interpreters of their decisions. That's usually when the rotten tomatoes start flying, because most of the appraisers look in the mirror and see authorities. No, we're interpreters of authorities' decisions. The authorities make the rules, we follow the rules. So you see? Okay, let's wade in, because this slide will get you there. These are a few of the value worlds. Most of what you're going to be talking about this week is market value. What the value is in the open market of that business interest. Now, I'm not always talking about 100% of the interest, right? So, I mean, it could be 1%, it could be 100%, or anything in between. Now, it would be too easy just to have a singular market value. No, I'm not going to let you off the hook. We have 3 different market values. In the book, I call them subworlds. You can call them levels. I don't care what you call them. There's 3 different levels or subworlds of market value. Asset, and we're going to get into this a little bit, which is just the net asset value. The stated value of the assets minus the stated value. The fair market or market value of the assets minus the stated value, face value of the liabilities is your net asset value. That's just the asset subworld. Usually going to be the lowest of the 3 market value levels. Then we have the financial market value, which is what the individual or non-strategic investor says, like private equity groups. Private equity groups value in financial market value. Then we have which is usually the highest value world, is synergy market value. And this is where the pure synergistic investor, how they view the value of that firm. Now every firm will have 3 different market values. Just about every firm will have 3 different market values. All correct at the same time, it's just relative to who's needing to know what the value is. We're going to dig into this, so don't get concerned. Now you're less concerned now than you were 10 minutes ago, right? All right, fair market value is the big legal world. For 25 years, this is all the professional business appraisers had to go by, because one of my fellow business book writers, Shannon Pratt, wrote a book back in the early 80s called Value in a Business, which should have been called Fair Market Value in a Business, because he only dealt with one value world, which was fair market value, because that was the only value world we all interacted in at that point. So we have multiple authorities in, here's a trick question. Who's the authority in market value? Who says how to market, or how to value market value? Who are the authorities?
Courts.
No, we don't care about the courts.
The SEC?
Well, yeah, they actually could be for public, but we're in private now. We're in the private world now. It'd be us, intermediaries, because we're the ones that study this. In asset market value, it's the auction people. The asset appraisers, auction people, because remember, we're just sort of just shutting the thing down more or less. But we're in financial and synergy market value, it's the intermediaries. So in fair market value, the IRS and courts. And if somebody can tell me the third authority in fair market values, it's the only one with three, I will give them, free of charge, the most valuable thing that they've ever possessed, which is one of my recent books called Midas Marketing. If you can tell me the third authority in fair market value. There are three. 5 seconds. All right, now I'll give you a hint, but no book.
The lenders?
Yeah, who's the authority behind ESOPs? Employee stock ownership plans. There's an authority. See, remember, authorities are like nouns. They're people, place, or things.
The managers?
The ERISA laws.
Are we?
It turns out authorities can be people, place, or things. ERISA laws can be an authority. So the ERISA laws, which is a big body of laws, which is a terrible thing in the U.S. because you have specific lawyers now. All they do is ERISA law stuff. That's how encompassing this is. But the ERISA laws tell us how to value for the purposes of ESOPs. And so, as an ESOP appraiser, I need to heed what the ERISA laws say, or I'm in big trouble because I'll take a wrong path.
That's Department of Labor, right?
Yes, Department of Labor. If you want to go up to the highest level, Department of Labor would be the authority. So the fair market value is when we're in most government-oriented reasons you need to know the value ends up in fair market value because the U.S. government says so. Most appraisers spend most of their time in fair market value because that's the biggest compliance world for a number of appraisals done is the best way. Owner value. You ask an owner what he or she thinks their business is worth. Do they care about market value or fair market value? No, they're talking about what they think it's worth. And they're not even thinking about what they think. Now, first of all, when you ask most owners, have you ever thought what your business is worth? They'll say, no, never thought about it. And your first response should be, liar, because they think about it 20 times a day. And the way they think about it is, if a wheelbarrow full of cash, how much cash needs to be in a wheelbarrow full of cash for them to just take the cash and then wheel that wheelbarrow out the back door? That's their view of value. Now, how much cash is in that wheelbarrow for them? However much they need to have in there. See, it has nothing to do with anything else because they're the authority. So when an owner says, my business is worth $10 million, I pull it out of them. It's $10 million. Does that have any relation to anything other than that's what they need it to be? They're the authority, so I don't say they're an idiot. I don't say, you idiot. Nobody would pay that much. No, I say, I understand why you say it's worth $10 million, but nobody's going to pay that much because everybody else is in a different value world. So the investor being the next one, the investment value world. Does the investor care what the owner? Well, the investor kind of cares what the owner says, but the investor is the authority in their world. Remember, they have a certain amount of money, they have a certain amount they can borrow or attract, and they have a certain return expectation. You put that all in the Cuisinart, out comes a number. That's it. And so they're the authority, what they say goes in their world. Collateral value. Does the bank care what an owner or an investor thinks their value is worth? No. Right? The bank's the authority, they have their own set of rules. So their rules, they're the authority, they say what it's worth. Incremental business value. This might be one of the chapters, the subject matter chapters. I think it's chapter 10. I'll let you think the author of the book would know what the chapters are. I think it's chapter 10, where I show how can you know if a decision is creating incremental business value, meaning any project or business is creating a return on investment greater than cost of capital. That's incremental business value. Now, in the large private companies, they call that, they don't call it incremental business value. I privatized a large public company construct. What's it called? That's close. Economic value added, EVA. So, all right. Now there's a couple dozen other value worlds that we're not going to go into. The insurable value world, like if you're going to have a business interruption policy or a buy-sell agreement, we have different authorities. We have different way of doing value, creating value. Early equity would just be venture capital. Why didn't I call it venture capital? Because angels sort of fall into that too a little bit. Public, So we have a public value world. Well, sure. We have public investment bankers that say, based on the comps of your industry, it should be an 18 PE, so it's that kind of thing. Fair value now, I wish FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, had read PCM's 1 because there's two different fair values now in the market, and it's FASB's fault. For 20 years, we had fair value, which was minority dissent and oppression cases, meaning you're a minority shareholder, you get crammed down. That was called fair value, that world. Then FASB comes out with impaired goodwill and some other nonsense a few years ago, mainly aimed at public companies, that they called fair value. Because they hadn't read PCM's 1, now they've created confusion in the market. But they're an authority. Can authorities do whatever they want to do? Yes. And so even though I chastised them, they didn't care. And so there's all kinds of other value worlds, like bankrupt value world. Who would be the authority in the bankruptcy value world? The court. The court says, here's how it's going to be done. You know, here's the rules of the game. Come play or don't play. We don't care. But, you know, here's the way it is. So, all right, I need to pay for your week here, and I only have a minute to do this. So here's how I'm going to pay for your week. How can you accurately determine the market value of any private company inside of 30 seconds? I'll say it again, and then the clock will run. How can you accurately determine the market value of any private company within 30 seconds? Yes?
Ask what the EBITDA is and use your 2.5 multiple.
Yeah, that's better than what I got, but no, that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, there's a reason why that doesn't work, and we'll explain that in a couple.
It's the only thing I can do the math in 30 seconds.
Oh, no, that would be wrong.
No.
By being an authority?
Ask the owner what they think it's worth,
Yeah.
and divide by 2.
Like,
Divide by 2. Now, if the owner, I'm not being facetious here, because this is what we've been using for 20 years. If the owner has an arrow in their back, and it's obvious to you as you're asking the question, oh, I noticed there's an arrow in your back, and it's not clear you'll last the day, then whatever they say the business is worth, multiply by 0.7. Because they don't have quite as big a sweat equity premium, because let's face it, they're not going to last the day. But if an owner doesn't have an arrow in the back, their sweat equity premium will almost be always by a factor of 2. So when an owner tells us that my business is worth $10 million, my first thought is, how am I going to get that owner to accept a $5 million value? Now let's explain this in value world theory, because this is all called value world theory. I guess I should have that on the slide somewhere. This is one of the sub-theories in middle market finance. Value world theory, how do we explain this? Can anyone explain what I just said about using value world theory terms? The owner is in what value world? Owner value. We're trying to decide or figure out what value world? Market value world. How do we, as interested stakeholders in this game, ever get a deal done? See what's going on here? We have an investor and investment value world, an owner and owner value world. Somebody explain to me how we ever get a deal done.
Compromise?
Compromise is right, but tell me in value world theory terms. What world do we have to get the parties in? Which is? Market value. See, if we can't get both the buyer, the investor, and the owner of the asset into a neutral value world, we're in big trouble. Because here's the body language. This is the psychology of the market. The body language is the owner saying, holding on to a desk for dear life, saying, I'll never sell this business. Oh, excuse me, my teeth just fell out. I'll never sell this business for less than $10 million. Well, the investor, they're holding on for dear life. The investor's sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, I only got $1 million. The bank will lend me 4. I'm in for $5 million. That's it. And so the investor is at 5. The owner's at 10. Market value says, well, based on things like seller notes, earnouts, and all that, this should be a $7.5 million deal. If those parties won't meet in that world, it's over. So the psychology of the market is we have to understand value world theory to understand how to maneuver people into the world and at least understand where they're coming from. So when an owner says $10 million, don't do the you idiot, nobody will say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, because that's what you need from the deal. And then you got to understand the investor. You may be the investor. You got to understand the investor if you're an intermediary. Where are they coming from? If you can't march them into a neutral value world, you're wasting your time. Now, somebody explain to me how you could ever get an owner who's the authority in their world out of their world into a neutral value world. How do you do it? Well, what's the psychology? That's right. Well, what's the psychology? Remember, as an investment banker, we don't play fair. We're sinister people. Who do we educate? Can we educate that owner out of their world? Who do we educate? That's sinister people.
The investor.
The spouse.
The spouse, always the spouse, always the spouse. Because what will happen is the spouse, and I'm going to be somewhat sexist here, if it's a 60-year-old male, the spouse has been used to kicking his butt for 25 years, that for the good of the family, take $7.5 million because we need to get out of this because the world's changed and you haven't, and it's all going down. And so that's a reinforcing mechanism that served that family well, even though they don't think about it. That's a mechanism that's necessary because that owner is so vested into that business. They define themselves in owner value world. They look in the mirror and they see a business owner. You ask them what they are, they're a business owner. And the minute that they leave that business owner world, they've lost their identity. And they're not going to leave willingly. So you got to boom, and only the spouse has the standing to get them out. Now, if it's a 90-year-old owner and the dentures have fallen out, is there any hope at all? No. What you do is you wait for rigor mortis to set in. You cut them, somehow get them out of that office at their desk, and then deal with whoever owns the business at that point. Because what we've learned is, once they cross 70, don't waste your time. It's a waste of time. We won't take anybody on as a sell-side engagement once they, in fact, once they hit 65. If they're still in that chair at that point and they haven't done any succession planning, exit planning, or any planning, there's a reason. They don't have a plan B. Where are they going to go? They look at their plan B is if they leave that world, the value world theory, when the minute they leave their world, that's the first step to the elephant graveyard. That they're going to be there on their path to death. And you know what? It's true, isn't it? We all need something to fight against, some problem. And the minute they leave that world and they don't have a plan B, they're dead. And so then what should we do? Let's give them a plan B. Rather than talk about selling that business, let's spend the next 3 or 4 months getting them into charity, getting them as a matter, getting them re-engaged in something, then they'll be in position to leave that world. See, this is the psychology of the market. We have to understand this stuff. This isn't dollars and cents. This is how people view the worlds. Worldview really matters in value world theory, obviously. And so, all right. Now, each of the chapters, the valuation chapters, we take one company through, private co, I know, private co. Joe and Jane Main Street on private, I wasn't on my game that day. And but when I take Joe and Jane Main Street through private co, same balance sheet, same income statement through all the value worlds. So you'll see at the very end of my presentation today, the same company, same time, dramatically different values. We're not talking nickels here. Dramatically different values because the authority says, why don't all the authorities say the value the same way? Hold that thought, because we'll get there. In fact, we're going to get there right now. Most of the value worlds only have one authority. Owner, value, investor. Fair market value has 3 just because it was the granddaddy of the value worlds, and we tried to do everything in fair market value. We just didn't know. You know, it was one of those things, and it caught hold, and how do you undo that kind of stuff? It's hard. In those few worlds that have multiple authorities, it's usually the one that speaks last, when it's the tax courts and the IRS, or it could be the one with the more compelling case that will win. For the most part, don't worry about competing authorities. For the most part, you will be caught in that unless you're an appraiser. Risk and return. Another way of saying risk and return is benefit stream and return expectation. Where the stream is what you get from the investment, and the return expectation is the risk associated with getting it. That's another way of looking at it. Is EBITDA always the benefit stream? No, this is why I didn't go with the 30-second rule, EBITDA. There's a lot of industries where it isn't the earnings that is the benefit stream. Name an industry where it's not the earnings that drives the value. How about software that has a subscription base? Is that earnings? No, it's the net revenues. It's the subscription base that drives that. There's a lot of industries where the benefit stream is not earnings based. Some are gross margin based. Some are gross revenues based. So as you're thinking about valuation, you have to understand how that industry defines benefit streams. Because if you just, now I'm going to use some examples here where it's recast EBITDA. No, I'm speaking to the camera, the benefit stream is determined by industry. And so we're just going to use recast EBITDA just for, so we can talk. The return expectation is what's the risk of achieving that stream as an investor? Okay, let's weigh in. So the authorities are defining these differently. Now, why would an authority in one world define risk and return differently than an authority in another? How could that ever happen? Why don't they all just come to some agreement that here's the return, here's the risk definition, now let's go play? Why are they defining risk and return differently? Which we now know all valuation is an attempt to find that balance between risk and return. So once again, if they're defining risk and return differently by world, each world generates unique value, right? Why are they doing that? They have different goals. So it just depends on what the authorities. FASB had this sort of notional goal of fairness in reporting. The tax courts had this notional goal that within a conflict situation, here's how we want risk and return to be viewed. Investment bankers in market value are just trying to be predictive. This is what we think it would bring if you did that. And so each authority has a different goal for what they're trying to achieve, and they define risk and return differently to achieve that goal, the best they can. So there's no perfect knowledge here. Is anybody from FASB or a tax court or the ERISA law in the room today? See, it's not like they get educated on this. They don't know. And so what they do is they sit around and think, okay, here's our goal. We're going to define risk and return to meet that goal without regard to anything else. They're not the whole of the value world theory. They're just participants in it. So we've got to be cognizant of how people are defining risk. And yet, let's think about this. Don't the players in each of the segments of the market define risk and return differently too? You start saying, my God, it'll blow your mind with everyone defining risk and return differently. It's just incredible. That's why we have such, I think I still say, in page 27 or 29, I think in the second edition, there's actually an infinite amount of correct values for every private company at any one time based on the probability of achieving the risk and return. You start getting a Monte Carlo simulation, wait a minute, you know, the world's an imperfect place in terms of achievement. Well, let's not go there because I think I was on drugs that day, I wrote that. But let's just stay at a value world level. So, okay, let's look at the benefit streams. So the return is different by segment, which we're not going to talk about because that'll blow our minds. But we are going to talk about return by world, especially a little bit later in a few slides. The authorities are using benefit streams to predict behavior or meet their needs. See, the owner's using the benefit stream to meet their needs because to get the owner value, what they need, well, the benefit stream has to be such. So they look at anything that moves in the business is theirs to claim, legal or otherwise. And so that's the owner value. I can mathematically describe how owners get to their value because they're doing it to meet their needs. Whereas investment bankers are just trying to predict behavior, predict an outcome before it happens. We have infinite variability just based on the return expectation. On the benefit stream. Well, the return expectation is the same, the risk. So we have it both defined differently by market and by world. So once again, we're as investment bankers, we're looking at it, okay, if there's a benefit stream of $1 million, what's another way of saying a 5 multiple? Because now we're sort of in market value multiples. What's that 5 indicate? Describe that sentence to me. If the benefit stream is $1 million, if somebody selected a 5 multiple, what are they trying to indicate? That they'll receive the benefit stream for 5 years, right? So that's another way of saying it. And so this is just a way of a nomenclature on how each of the authorities view their world. So whether it's either by organizing or by predicting or meeting needs. So now we're into market value. Most of what you're going to talk about this week will be market value. I think there will be some fair market value talk because I think you talk about ESOPs a little bit. I don't know, I can't remember now if there's much, if you get into individual value worlds, that much on the math. I think so most of it's going to be market value. So all we're talking about is the highest price available for the assets or stock in the company. So we've already talked about the 3 levels or subworlds, asset, financial, and synergy, whereas the asset appraisers are the authority for the asset market value, intermediaries, brokers are the authorities for financial and synergy market value. Most owners of small private businesses trade in which of these subworlds? When they transfer eventually, what subworld? For the small private business. Asset. They want to go up to the financial. Their goal, if they had such a goal, would be to trade financial because that's usually going to be a higher value. The unfortunate part is there really any goodwill in most of these small service companies? The owner's been running it for salary, right? Their compensation, really the business generates a lifestyle salary or some sort of compensation. The next person in just gets that, and they sort of value the business around that because there isn't any goodwill typically. And so the owners, I'm not recommending owners want to transfer an asset market value. I'm stating that based on how they've organized their business, asset market value is really how it transfers. That's the value world, or subworld, excuse me. It transfers them. We're not going to spend much time on asset market value because we all, now as a buyer, which subworld do you want to buy in? I buy all businesses I've ever bought personally at book value. Never paid multiple earnings for anything, I never will. And we're gonna talk more in an hour and a half about that.
You went over the synergy part, and I recently closed on synergy, so owner, synergy, same business.
Yes.
There might be reasons for synergies. Is that a valuable, market value?
Yeah.
Synergy.
Oh yeah, we're 2 slides away from synergy.
Okay, good.
Because there's a math to synergy. There's math to all this, by the way. The book shows the math, I'm just the model for the math. And so we're gonna start in asset, go to financial, and then end in synergy. But synergy is where the action is if you're a seller. But if you're a buyer, so you remember, it's perspective. Worldview matters. As a buyer, I only buy an asset market value. But as a seller, I don't want to sell an asset market value because that's a real drag, right? And so we don't want to, I have a whole chapter on asset market value just to torture you. But this is basically just, the only action in asset market value is when you're looking at the assets, what's your premise of value and are you using fair market value or market value to derive the value of those assets? It's almost always the stated value of, or the face value of the liabilities. This is not a net asset value course. So we're not going to talk about that. You can get all the net asset value stuff you want in chapter 6. So that's all we're going to talk about there. Now I am going to show you, by the way, the last hour of my talk, how to buy in asset market value, which is really good stuff. But anyways, we're not going to talk. Where the action is in financial and synergy market value from a seller standpoint. And now we've got this concept of stream versus the multiple. So what is the benefit stream versus what is that return expectation that's often, not always, often represented by some sort of multiple, acquisition multiple. So when we're in financial and synergy market value, we're in this benefit stream return expectation. Now for shorthand reasons, so we can talk about this, we're going to talk about EBITDA times an acquisition multiple to be a surrogate for stream times the multiple. Now, do private equity groups do anything more when they're doing an analysis on a deal than just figure out what the multiple they can pay and what the stream looks like? Do they do any more analysis than that? And actually they do. Actually they use a spreadsheet. And almost all corporate buyers do this too. Where you'll have actually a series of spreadsheets. One is a spreadsheet where just as business by itself, what's it likely to do over time? The second spreadsheet is, what are the synergies if we own this? What would we do incrementally different? Usually, let's hope it's better. Incrementally because we may have lower operating costs, lower consolidation costs. And then your third spreadsheet is a consolidation of those two where you can really see what's this thing worth to us. You see, so there's 3 spreadsheets. The pegs, what I'm telling you is that 99% of the pegs will do that analysis, but they won't share any synergies. And what I am telling you is the large public companies will do the same exact analysis and may share synergies. And we're going to get into that in a second. But so what we're really talking about here is, all right, the stream's influenced by the presenter. So what is the stream on each deal? Are we talking about reported income statement? Are we talking about adjusted income statement? Are we talking about something beyond adjusted income statement? Whereas the buyer brings the multiple. The only reason we talk in terms of multiples and not spreadsheets is a shorthand way to communicate in the industry. If we start talking spreadsheets with owners, what happens? Glass over, and then the shotgun appears. And so what we got to do is we have to talk multiples with them. And it's a shorthand for the intermediaries too. But I got to tell you, most intermediaries make the following mistake. When I say most, I mean 90%. They spend all their time arguing about the multiple. Oh no, it should be a 6.5, not a 6.2. All right, it did. The buyer brings the multiple. It's the buyer's assessment of risk that is reflected in that multiple. All the action is on the stream side of it. That's where all the action is, and yet very few of the intermediaries I meet out on the street spend as much time on the stream. And here's what I'm talking about. So what earnings level do you use when you're presenting the stream? Let's say that the reported EBITDA, and I know I just said that it isn't, the stream is not always EBITDA, but for this example, we're using EBITDA. Let's say the reported EBITDA on a company is $1 million. I mean, that's right off the income statement. You haven't made any adjustment, you just pull numbers. Are you going to use that number? Or, what if you have a recast, so the owner's taking out an extra $1 million over their replacement? Let's say they're totally passive, they take $1 million. So, what acceptable recasts are discretionary seller expenses and one-time expenses. So let's say that last year they had $1 million loss due to fire that was uninsured. Well, let's hope that's a one-time expense, and that's an allowable. Now, it's somewhere around page 60 or 70, I have a whole page on what's allowable in the market for these discretionary resets or adjustments and these one-time adjustments. So we're not gonna get too concerned about that now. So there's almost always a difference for a mid-sized company, a large difference between reported EBITDA and recast EBITDA. It isn't always double, but there's a typical deal for us in my firm would be a $80 to $100 million sales company is a typical sell side deal for us. And then we may have 15 items in the recast. 15. So we have the owners grandly living for the business, you know. So there's all kinds of life insurance and car insurance and third home stuff. And so we recast all that because the owner isn't trying to maximize profits, right? The owner's trying to minimize taxes due. And so they work within the, I'm not saying they're all stealing from the business, I'm saying they work within the letter of the law, what the IRS will allow. We recast all that. It's not that unusual for us to have a 2 or 3x difference between reported and recast. But once again, what level of earnings are you presenting to the buyer? Now, if the seller doesn't know anything, they'll say, well, here's my income statement, make me an offer. Well, any buyer is going to not know any different and just use a reported EBITDA. Well, how would they even know what's discretionary? Whereas most intermediaries will stop at the recast line. Well, they'll do all kinds of creative stuff with recast. Maybe their 15 items are valid, maybe they're not, who knows. Well, I'm proposing to you that there's a third level that hardly anybody gets to, but we always do because we're greedy investment bankers. And so we try to sell, not buy, but sell, because remember, we're presenting the stream. We try to sell at the synergized recast EBITDA. So you start with the recast EBITDA. Where did that other $1 million come from? Well, let's say that we do a synergy study that with a particular buyer, that it's a big buyer that's in the industry. It's not a PEG, because remember, PEGs won't share this because we're in the synergy world now. So it's a big buyer, and let's say there's $2 million worth of annual synergies that the buyer will benefit forevermore. We can shut down warehouses. They borrow more cheaply. They don't need our AP people. It's all kinds of G&A collapse that they don't need all. They already have that. They already pay for that. System stuff. Well, let's say that's $2 million and I get them to share $1 million of it. I get them to share half. So we get credit for $1 million of those 2 million synergies. We just went from 2 million to 3 million. Now the magic is, use a 5 multiple against each of these cases. Same business, same time, different subworlds. So the business is worth 5, 10, or 15 million at the same time. Which do you prefer? Well, it depends on who you are. I mean, as a greedy investment banker, I get paid on 15. And so I want 20, but I'll take 15. Whereas, you know, most of the brokers we know will stop at the 10 and think they've done really good. Now, the thing about synergies is why would anybody ever share synergies? All of this happens under their watch, right? This happens post-transaction. Why would anybody ever share synergies?
Because they have to have it.
They have to have it. That's the only reason. They have to.
Or they can't let someone else get it.
That's exactly right.
Better.
Ego. What's the condition where we always get some synergies? Not always have, but some. A male CEO of a large public company somehow has found his way into negotiations. Thank you, Lord. It's another sunlight music moment. Because ego, is it his money? No. Is he necessarily doing something stupid? No. Remember, they got that second spreadsheet. He says, well, wait a minute. To us, it's worth $30 million. If I got to kick another $5 million in to make sure that, and what is he trying to do? Does he care about the shareholders now? He's caring about what you said. His death competitor public company can't have this. Because if they get it, it's going to cost us another $30 million. And so, is he stupid? I'm not saying he's stupid. I'm just saying that value world theory explains how this business is worth $15 million. And this is real world. Friday this week, we're closing an aerospace deal. And exactly the condition. Two public, now this is a $30 million private company in here. Actually, here company. And there were two big $10 billion public companies bidding for this, both trying to consolidate the industry at the same time. Oh, thank you, Lord, I lived for this. When I dream, I don't dream this good. And what happened is, where did we find out what the synergies are? Where could you ever know? Is there a book you can go read about? But no, how do you know what the synergies are in these deals? How could you know?
It's a public company.
Well, public a little bit, industry knowledge a little bit. Who tells you what the synergies are?
You do, you make it up and you get.
Oh, no, you gotta be careful. You gotta live in the real world. They tell you.
They-
They tell you. Because what happens is we run these meetings, finally the buyers and sellers get in the same room. And we're taking notes as the investment banker. Well, what do you plan to do with that St. Louis warehouse after close? Well, of course we'll shut that down. We'll consolidate it into our San Jose. Well, wait a minute, where are you guys borrowing these days? Well, we're a big company and they peacock. We borrow at 1.5. 1.5, you guys are great. We want to be you guys. And so we write that down. At the end of the day, they tell us 10 different synergy items. Man, you guys are wonderful. We never get that. Blah, blah, blah. Well, when it comes to negotiation time, we've got a synergy study. They told us. And does each buyer have the exact same synergies? No. That's buyer dependent. So when we're good, in this case, both these big public companies had 90% of the same synergies. First round offers, 40 million, selling at 80 million. Now, how were we viewed? In this case, I took the deal because it's an old buddy of mine, 20-year-old buddy of mine. So I did the negotiations. We're viewed as investment bankers' successor at the 40 million because that's where the first offers came from. Of course, in our engagement letter, we got a big ratchet up that we get to over 50 million. Wonderful things happen for future generations of the Slee family, and so just boom. And so, but we play the game. This is the game. I'm letting you in on the game. And now, are we costing these? No. These two big public companies, I know their plans because they told us. They're going to put hundreds of millions of dollars into this consolidation strategy over the next 5 years. Worldwide consolidation. They got to have us. We're the linchpin. So it's just wonderful. I don't get that all the time. When I get it, it's my Christmas. It's my Christmas. And so, all right. So let's dig in a few more slides. We may have to take a break. I can't remember. When did we last take a break? About an hour ago?
2 hours ago.
All right, 2 more slides. We're gonna take a break. Financial market value. What are we talking about? The subject has a positive earning capacity, meaning there's some reason to think that there's some threat of profitability, as we say. Usually it's demonstrated. You're talking about an individual like a displaced executive or a non-strategic like a PEG. Even if a PEG is strategic, they won't share synergies. They have this right, by the way. The PEGs are right not to share synergies. Because you start sharing synergies. And do you realize all the synergies, by the way? I wish. No. And, but anyway, so what we're talking about here in a recast EBITDA standpoint is they use recast EBITDA as the benefit stream, and they're using a multiple as a shorthand by which to communicate. The parties use a multiple. Now, there are spreadsheets behind this, but they use a multiple to communicate. Now, what does this presume? What is the deal structure? Now, I'm not saying 100% of the deals use this deal structure. I'm saying that a multiple of earnings deal uses this deal structure. When the seller keeps excess cash, so there's always some argument over what excess cash is. It's a big argument. But we sort of, that's mathematical. We can kind of figure out what excess cash is. They keep real estate if it's on the balance sheet. Let's say do it on the balance sheet. But let's say it's on the balance sheet. That's outside the multiple of earnings time, and they pay off long-term debt. There's a big argument over whether a credit line, a short-term credit line, is interest-bearing debt. All depends how strong the deal is. Which way that goes. In the real world, the seller should pay off both the credit line and the long-term debt. If we have a strong company, we can get the buyer just assume the credit line. But almost always, the seller has to pay off. So what you're really saying theoretically is the excess cash goes to pay off long-term debt. Is that always the case now? But in any event, on the closing statement, the seller's responsible for the interest-bearing debt. The buyer takes the operating assets. We're talking about things like receivables, inventory, fixed equipment, fixed expenditure, and then assumes the payables and accruals. Now, does every deal have a little intrigue? Yes, every deal's a little different on this because it just depends on how strong the parties are and how well you negotiate it. I'm real big on structure negotiation because don't just assume it's always going to be this way. We always test the edges. So even if we're getting viewed in synergy market value, you want to win this battle too, right? As a seller representative. If I'm a buyer, I don't want any of this stuff. I'll take all the assets, but the liabilities, anything on the right side of the balance sheet, I can't see. What is that over there? I don't care. And so it just depends on who you are in terms of how. But from a typical standpoint, a typical deal, if there is such a thing, which of course there isn't, if there was such a thing, this would be the standard starting point at which then we negotiate against. So there's your financial market value. Last slide, then break. Synergy market value. Now we have not only a positive earning capacity, we have a cherished market position. So you're in the way. And so they need to get you out of the way. So what we have here is a synergistic buyer. We're now at that benefit stream of synergistic recast EBITDA, maybe the same multiple. Can't make up synergies, so I have a guide, hard synergies, what hard things that are knowable before the transaction. Those are hard synergies. You can only really deal with those, because if you're talking, see, here's the difference between a hard and soft synergy. Hard synergy is you consolidate warehouses, you know about what that's going to be. Soft synergy is, oh, we should get 5 more points in gross margin there. Oh, no, the market has something to say about that. We don't know about that. And so you won't get credit for those sorts of synergies. So I do have a guide. How much you get credit for, what percent of the synergy pool is purely negotiated. We have to get credit for at least 10% of those synergies to pay for ourselves as intermediaries. If we get 50, then things are good. It's not that often we get half. We hardly ever get half, or more than half. So I have, the only time I branded in the book, Slee's Guide to Synergy Sharing. I have a little thing in there that says, what's the subject look like, or what percent of that synergy pool will you likely get credit for? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and I describe that for you. That's as good as it gets. No one's ever done a study on this. And so, because this is so one-off-ish, it's so dependent on the deal and the players in the deal. I got 20 years doing this, of getting synergies. This is a pretty good bet, I think. So let's take